Welcome back to Hounds of History, the YouTube channel where we discover amazing stories of dogs that left their paw prints on humankind and on history. Today we're going to go over a book I read just a month ago called No Better Friend by Robert Weintraub. This is an amazing story of courage and loyalty. So grab some coffee and let's go through this story. All right, let's start at the beginning with Judy's early life. She was born in February 1936 in a Shanghai dog kennel. There were English expats in Shanghai at the time that were bringing over English and British dogs and breeding them there. And the people of Shanghai just ran with it. They loved these exotic dogs. So even as a 3-week-old puppy, Judy was a little different. She was a wild girl at heart. She actually dug out of the kennel and ended up on the streets of Shanghai for the first few months of her life. She started out pretty rough. She ended up being homeless, living in cardboard boxes, taking whatever that she could find. Eventually, a shop owner who was feeding her out the back of his shop kind of took her in. Eventually, the shop owner got robbed, unfortunately, and Judy stood up and tried to protect her person, but got the snot beat out of her, and then eventually ended up back in those kennels that she started from. They were absolutely blown away that she had come back. In 1936, Judy caught the eye of the British Navy crew aboard the HMS Nat. It was a gunboat patrolling the Yangtze River. These gunboats were pretty incredible. There was American, there was British gunboats. But basically, they would patrol the rivers for enemy planes, enemy people. These gunboats actually all had mascots as well. Some of them had monkeys, some of them had parrots from the jungle, some of them had dogs. So kind of their rival ship, it was just a friendly rivalry. They had a boxer terrier, so the Nat needed a dog to kind of compete with this rival boat. She just grabbed the hearts of everybody on this gunboat. She became the ship's mascot. She would alert the crew to incoming aircraft with her sharp senses. They actually were hoping that she would be a pointer dog out in the field so that when they were at port, they could go hunting and find birds and have some extra food. Judy was not good at that at all, but she was good at pointing out aircraft. So she could hear the enemy aircraft coming way before the people on these gunboats could, and she would point to the sky. She couldn't catch birds, real birds, but she could catch some other birds, which gave these guys plenty of time to prepare for enemy fire. She also, one of my favorite stories from this book, the Yangtze River had these kind of like poop boats that would go up and down the river and collect, human excrement from the villages and put it on the boat. And as they went down the river, they would disperse this waste into the river. Well, this stank. And if you were on a gunboat and your windows were open when one of these came by, the entire ship would just be infested with this smell for days at a time. Well, Judy figured out that the people didn't like this, and she could smell these boats coming from way down the river, giving these people on the gunboats time to close their windows, close the doors, put up curtains, make sure that the smell did not penetrate the ship. Silly girl. As World War II heats up in the Pacific Theater, this is our second Pacific Theater story. I promise I'll get away from this on the next video. This is just such an interesting time because I'd never done the research on it. And the author of this book does a phenomenal job doing the research and telling the story of not just Judy, but of the time. So if you're a dog nerd and a history nerd, this is definitely a book for you. So in June 1939, Judy is transferred to the HMS Grasshopper, and Britain declares war on Germany in September. The ship was redeployed to Singapore, and Judy was about to face her first real test. Up until this point, her life was pretty great, pretty easy. She even fell in love during that time. You're going to have to go read the story. It's a hilarious story about this dog love story that these boys on this boat just retold in detail. Go read the book. So in the Battle of Singapore, in February 1942, the HMS Grasshopper is ordered to evacuate British women and children to the Dutch East Indies. But so they get everybody on this boat. War is raging. It's kind of chaos. They get a ton of people on this boat. And en route, Japanese bombers strike the boat, sinking the ship. Judy actually ends up trapped below deck under a row of lockers. But a brave crewman risks his life to free her, shoves her through a porthole. Judy makes it to a deserted island with the survivors, and here's where her heroism shines. With no food or water, Judy uses her keen senses to find underground freshwater stream, saving everyone from dehydration. There's also stories of her catching rats and snakes and bringing it back to the people. She could have just caught them and eaten it herself, but she was loyal. She was a good dog. The survivors, including Judy, trek 200 miles through the jungle to Sumatra, hoping to catch the ship to India. But they miss it by just a few days. Their luck runs out. They arrive a day too late and are captured by the Japanese, becoming prisoners of war. And this is where Judy's POW begins. Here's where she meets the man who would change her life forever. Judy ends up in the, excuse me if I don't pronounce this right, in 1942 she ends up in the Glagowar POW camp in Medan, Sumatra. The conditions here are brutal. Even though they're not quite as bad as the Jews experienced in Germany, they're pretty bad. The Japanese are brutal captors. There's starvation, there's disease, there's beatings, and forced labor on the Sumatra Railway, which ends up being called the Death Railway. Thousands of British, Australian, and Dutch prisoners suffer, and many of them don't survive. Dengue fever, starvation, brutal working conditions and living conditions. But Judy becomes kind of a beacon of hope. She scavenges for the starving men, as she's so good at doing, and distracts guards before beatings and boosts morale with her presence. She actually, from the start of her life, she was kind of a loner, and we see dogs do that. They tend to be kind of the outskirt dogs. She was one of those dogs that stayed kind of on the outskirts of the camp. They would take her to the railway when they were working, and she would kind of stay in the jungle away from the people, scavenging and staying away from brutal guards. But as these brutal guards would come in to beat their captors, Judy would come flying out of the trees and distract these guards, biting at their ankles and barking at them, narrowly escaping death herself. She had guns pointed at her entire life from the very start, and she always narrowly escaped. Aircraftman Frank Williams, an RAF radarman from Portsmouth, UK. In 1942, Frank sees Judy. She's emaciated, but he can see inside there's still some fight in her. He shares his meager rice ration with her, which is usually infested with maggots, just so you know. But he ends up sharing his very little rice ration with her. It's a selfless act that sparks an unbreakable bond between him and Judy. Frank convinces the camp commandant, Colonel Bano, to register Judy as an official POW. This is you have to read the story of how he manages to do that. Judy actually ends up having her second litter of puppies, and he gets this colonel drunk and offers him a puppy in exchange for her becoming an official prisoner of war, which gives her some protection and some rights. She's the only dog in history to actually achieve this POW status. This protects her from the guards' hostility, at least for a while. But the camps get worse. By 1944, the prisoners, including Judy and Frank, are moved to the harsher River Valley camp in Singapore. Food is even more scarce. Dysentery is rampant, and the guards' cruelty intensifies under Captain Nishi. Judy faces death again when a lice outbreak prompts the guards to target her, but Frank and others hide her, risking their own lives. One of the most harrowing moments of Judy's life comes in 1944. Now, keep in mind, she's been a prisoner of war for several years now. She's emaciated. She's had a litter of puppies. She's survived a lot already. Judy and Frank and other POWs are loaded onto a transport ship to be moved to another camp. However, the ship is torpedoed by Allied forces. So the friendlies didn't realize that this ship was full of POWs. They thought it was a Japanese warship, and they torpedoed it. It sinks in the Java Sea. Chaos erupts. Frank pushes Judy out to safety, again through a porthole, but they're separated in the oily, burning water. Survivors later recount that an incredible sight. Judy, despite the danger of continuing air raids, swims tirelessly through the sea, collecting men, allies, and even Japanese captors. They would hold on to her collar and she would swim them to a boat or the shore. And she just spent hours in this ocean just swimming around collecting people. She didn't discriminate either. She collected as many people as she possibly could to safety. She delivers one person to safety and goes back for another, saving countless lives. Frank, heartbroken, searches for her for hours. But days later, at a River Valley camp, Judy leaps onto him, covered in oil but alive. During this moment, there's a wonderful part in this book where a lot of these survivors end up on an island with Judy. Frank is separated from her. He ends up going to safety. Judy ends up on an island with all these survivors. One of them's pregnant. Judy spends so much time helping these people, finding fresh water, catching fish, catching snakes, helping keep these people alive and keep their spirit alive. You know, if it weren't for her, she probably would wag that little stub tail of hers every once in a while and get people smiling. This girl was incredible. Judy actually wasn't even supposed to be on this ship. When the POWs are being transported, she actually wasn't qualified to go on the ship, but Frank had spent some time training her to hide. And this is a beautiful part of the story. Frank actually trains Judy to hide in a burlap sack. And then when he opens it, she would escape to safety. And then he would whistle again and she would run back into the burlap sack. So to start with, she wasn't allowed to go on the ship. So Frank ties her to a pole at the camp, but with a slip knot. So to the guards, it looks like Judy's going to be tied up and left behind, which they're thrilled about because they've hated this dog and she's had protection. So they're kind of hoping all the POWs will end up on the boat and they can shoot Judy finally. They've been wanting to do that for a while. So all the POWs start getting in line, and it's a long trek to the boat. It's miles and hours. So Judy is told to stay. And the second they get far enough away, Frank lets out a soft whistle. Judy pulls on the rope, runs into this burlap sack, and then Frank throws it over his shoulder. He dumps the clothes that are in there and throws Judy in this burlap sack over his shoulder. What Frank didn't know is going to be hours before they got on the boat. So bless his heart, he carries this large dog thrown over his shoulder for hours to get on the boat. At one point, they do an inspection. So they're going to go through and inspect the cargo of the POWs again. And thanks to Frank's training, he opens the burlap sack. Judy runs into the jungle. They're able to investigate it, that there's just a blanket in there. And then once the guards are away, he drops the burlap sack, opens it up, lets out a soft whistle that Judy can hear from miles away, and she runs back into the sack to make it onto the ship. By August 1945, World War II ends. Judy and Frank are liberated. They face one last hurdle: smuggling Judy onto a troop ship in Liverpool. The men hide her under Frank's bunk, and the ship's cook, a dog lover, keeps her fed. Judy roams the ship, charming everyone, just as she did a mascot on those gunboats. In England, Judy becomes a national hero. On June 8th, 1948, her bark is broadcast worldwide by the BBC during Victory Day celebrations. She's awarded the Dickin Medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross, for her bravery. Frank and Judy just cannot help their wandering spirit. Frank does not settle into civilian life very well. He tries. And Judy becomes kind of despondent. So Frank, knowing his dog and knowing his own spirit, in 1948, they moved to Tanzania for a government food scheme, essentially. But Judy thrives in the African bush, just like she did in the Pacific realm, in the jungle. This is her element. She's good at flight. She's good at being a wild dog. But at age 14, she develops a tumor and ends up having to be euthanized. Frank is devastated and never owns another dog. Their story, though, lives on as one of the greatest tales of friendship in wartime. What makes Judy's story so powerful is not just her survival through 3 shipwrecks and traveling through jungles and brutal prisoner of war camps, but it's her selflessness. Judy was wild at heart. She was always exploring. She was always bold. She was kind of always off in the distance. But when her loyalty was needed, she was there. Judy didn't discriminate when she was rescuing people out of the water during one shipwreck. She swam through a war zone under bomber planes to save everyone she could, even her captors. That's the heart of a true hero. She was selfless, unwavering, and devoted to those around her. But in the end, she chose Frank as her closest companion, and thank God, because they were so well matched. It reminds me of the scripture that captures the power of selflessness. John 15:13, which says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down his own life for one's friends." Judy embodied this love, risking her life time and time again to protect and inspire. Her story shows that selflessness, even in the darkest times, can light the way for others. Again, I would highly recommend reading this book. It was wonderfully done. Judy's life teaches us that courage and loyalty can shine through even the worst circumstances. From Shanghai to Sumatra, from shipwreck to POW camp, she was more than just a dog. She was a symbol of hope and a symbol of sacrifice. Thanks for joining me to celebrate her incredible story. If you want to dive deeper, check out No Better Friend by Robert Weintraub. Until next time, take joy. Enjoy your dogs. They're a wonderful gift. I truly think that they're God's greatest gift to mankind. And we'll catch you on the next side, where we find another story of a dog that left its paw prints on history.